So, we're online, are we? Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this afternoon session. I suppose that for some, this is still a morning session, and for others, a very late evening session. We know that our interconnected technologies are an integral part of our lives. I don't think I need to repeat that. But their development and operation also have a significant environmental impact. And as governments and other stakeholders have grown more aware of this impact, there's been a greater priority that has been given to it. To give you an example, 2 weeks ago, we had the Council of Europe Reykjavik Summit a few weeks ago, which identified two major issues. One, digital development, and second, environmental impact. So I think it is important that we look at those developments jointly, and make sure that these are the challenges for our societies, also not only for all of the citizens, but also for the international and regional organizations. So that will be a little bit the debate of what we will be having. Therefore, we're having key participants which are involved in a number of different technologies: data streaming, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, that are at different levels of maturity, commercialization, and adoption. So in this session, we will be discussing the challenge of governance as it relates to the environmental impact, particularly the energy consumption, but also considering other indirect drivers like mining of rare earths and rare materials. And so the Council of Europe, on its side, has been working on digital technologies for some time now. We have been, as I said yesterday in the opening panel, we've been involved with the EuroDIG and with the IGF since its creation, and it's a very high interest on the topic of ecological development, environmental development. Human rights, we stand for human rights, obviously cannot take place if we don't have a healthy biosphere. And that healthy biosphere we're all in charge of. Without a healthy functioning of our ecosystems, there are no human rights. So we definitely need to look at what are those possible impacts and how can we mitigate those impacts. But before, and also our European Court of Human Rights in the past has already, when confronted with serious ecological issues, have considered it through the framework, through the scope of the European Convention on Human Rights. And right now, we're thinking of new instruments that may need to be created in order to respond to all of that. But before we go into the matter of how are we going to respond to it, I think it is also important that we look at what is actually that impact? What is that environmental impact? And what are the ecological consequences of the use of this, but also of the main data gatherings and online communications and the use of digital technologies in general, including artificial intelligence. So I asked Stephen Setyavan, who is a master's student, but also biologist and industrial ecologist, to give us a little bit of an oversight, and then I will give the floor to the other panelists, Johannes Kernberger, Celine Kaira, Eero Lindqvist, and Vesna Manojovlic, to come into that as well. So first of all, Stephen, it's your job as a biologist and industrial ecologist to enlighten us a little bit on what the consequences are. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Patrick. So if we talk about environmental impact and consequence, I will use the life cycle assessment 14001 as like the main document standard, because like we are talking about governance and we need to see on the international standard. So we have 4 types of stages in assessing impact, basically environmental or like economic impact, and I want to make it simple. Basically, if we talk about environmental impact, we are talking about things that are become the output to the environment. For example, if we produce this battle. So what comes out of it? Because like we have the law of conservation energy and mass, so there will be something that will be produced out of it. And like there are several categories, for example, acid that will be released to the environment, or like fresh water, or like ozone layer depletion, like that. But the consequence will be divided into three main categories, which are the terrestrial biodiversity reduction, freshwater biodiversity reduction, and marine water biodiversity reduction. So basically, these things that are emitted into the environment, they reduce the quality of life that the ecosystem has, and it becomes the consequence that we experience in different ways. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Stephen. Of course, well, I forgot to say that we have also three online speakers here in the panel, Johanna Skinberger and Celine Kaira, whom I already briefly introduced, are from the OECD, and they will give us online a brief overview of the direct and the indirect impacts of artificial intelligence, which obviously also has an overall ICT influence. Can you maybe, I don't know, Johannes or Celine, who will be speaking first, but you have the floor, as the two of you are based in Paris and speaking from Paris. Celine? Johannes?
Thank you, Patrick. Hi, it's so lovely to see you, and apologies we can't be with you physically today. So indeed, you know, when it comes to AI, you do have, we find it useful to use this direct and indirect framework as well. It's interesting because when we think about AI, you know, often we think of something that is perhaps software or something, you know, ephemeral, but it is really rooted in concrete infrastructure, like data centers, like the computing stack that train these large models that process data at a large scale. And of note, you know, we've really seen over the last decade or so, since around 2010, with the advent of deep learning, we've seen these models really balloon in terms of their capacity, their size, their parameter count. Notably, you know, since late last year, again, with generative AI, we've now really seen the rise of big, large language models. And some experts are coming out and saying, you know, this has environmental impacts that could grow by several magnitudes as a result of the models getting bigger, processing even more data. So that's for the training, but also the inference, you know, being so widely used, what we call, you know, inferencing. It's every time you look up a recommendation that it sends an, you know, an inference is done to get you that information, you know, ChatGPT, for instance. So we're seeing the scales grow, we're seeing the models getting bigger. And why is this problematic? Well, as I've alluded to, simply put, it's the resources used to train these models and also to use them have their own environmental impacts. And again, I like the idea of using the life cycle impact as well, because at each stage of the life cycle of this resource, there are emissions, there's energy use, and there's also water. Water is something that is often not talked about to cool data centers, for instance. So at the OECD, we look into this through the OECD AI expert group on AI, compute, and climate. We released a report last year at COP27 that looked into kind of that sketched a broad framework for how one can think about direct and indirect environmental impacts. So I'll briefly pass it to Johannes just to give a very high level overview of what that framework is, and then we can jump into the discussion. Thank you, Patrick. Over to you, Johannes.
Thank you so much. Johannes, would you like to add something to that?
Yeah, thanks, Celine. So just very quickly to explain the kind of framework we used, which is not something we kind of came up with, but it's something that already in the ICT industry is being used, and the differentiation between direct impacts, which means the direct effects of the infrastructure that is behind digital technologies, such as AI, and then the indirect impacts, which concern the application of AI in our case, or of digital technologies, both in a positive and negative way. So just as an example, when you use a networking server that is part of the compute stack, that's part of the data center, when it comes to the direct effects, it needs to be you need to kind of mine the critical minerals. It needs to be manufactured, shipped, built in the data center. And then the majority of the impact is, of course, in the operation, meaning it consumes energy, it consumes water, which both have an associated carbon footprint. And then it's being discarded at the end of its life cycle. That is the direct impact. Now, the indirect impact would be the application of a given, for instance, AI model, which could be used for a lot of positive things, for smart energy systems and networks, for transport, for climate prediction, but it can also be used in a negative way, for instance, in oil and gas exploration. So we really try to have the framework as wide as possible and look at all the impacts that exist. And as Stephen said, the life cycle approach is really useful there.
Thank you so much. I was almost thinking we should have a carbon footprint and a H2O footprint on each time we're using our computers here in this room or anywhere else, so that there is like a barometer that comes up, pops up on our computer and gives us an indication of what the impact is. I don't know, Eero, if that is also what the Finnish Data Center Association would be looking into, but you said you may give us a little bit more insight on the EU Energy Efficiency Directive, which of course also includes data centers, including the network data centers. So can you give us a little bit more insight? Am I a bit too far-reaching by putting a barometer on each of our devices?
No, I think that's a good goal, because everybody is talking that we are using cloud services. So what are cloud services? They are these huge factories, data centers, filled with computers and storage devices. And they consume really a lot of electricity and also water when we are in the warmer climate zones. And if you take a look the environmental reports from, for example, Meta, Microsoft, Google, and their greenhouse gas emissions, what would you think is the biggest contribution there? The consumption of electricity, their own operations? No. Over 90% of their emissions comes from the supply chains. So the devices that we put into the data center, that are manufactured, that are delivered, and all of these has a carbon footprint, energy footprint, and I think that this is not transparent, and we have to make this more visible to the users. For example, training of the GPT-3 model, it consumed 1,300 megawatt hours and produced 550 tons of CO2, just the training.
Thank you. It's an excellent illustration. Well, I'm looking at Chris Buckridge here. I'm not going to ask you to intervene, Chris, but you were so kind to invite me to Iceland, and Iceland is one of the countries which promotes the installation of data centers very much. So I was going to ask Vesna Manojlovic from RIPE NCC if she would have anything to add. She's also the let's say the fourth or the fifth person in the room that joins us remotely. So Vesna, would you like to add something to the discussion that we've had so far?
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased to be invited and to be in your company. And in addition to what the previous speaker said, I'd like to bring the voices of the academics and researchers that gathered together in several events that I was part of. I'm kind of just speaking on behalf of them because I'm neither the academic nor the researcher. I'm a community builder, so I cross-connect these various communities, mostly technical communities. And the main paper that was suggested here for this session was the one that we worked together at the hackathon about the quantum internet, which has been working on the connection between the sustainability and the quantum internet, and they're really the opposite from each other. But on the other hand, these young researchers went really deep into trying to figure out how can this very new technology develop in the sustainable way in the future, because right now that is still kind of a science fiction or like on a very early stages of the development. So now is the time for them to think about their responsibilities towards decreasing the environmental impact on their side. And then the second technical community which is busy with this is, of course, Internet Engineering Task Force, the standardization body for the protocols that are underlying all of the internet networking. And they have organized a workshop about the e-impact, which has been published as a report. And their main work right now is on determining the green metrics for actually measuring the impact so that it can be decreased. And finally, sorry, one more. Last week there was another academic conference called Computing Within Limits, and they research a little even more alternative and kind of fringe topics about how can the computing itself as a computing science take into consideration the environmental impact of the internet.
Thank you so much. I would ask here in the room, because I'm also following online, if there's any interaction here or intervention. My colleague Vadim Pak, who is also with Chris, was preparing this session. Chris, you have a question. You have in this room, you have to speak out loud because there is only the microphones here which capture the voices in the room. So Chris Buckridge, maybe introduce yourself as well.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, Chris Buckridge. I'm here as a technical community representative on the IGF MAG and as a personal capacity. And I actually have to jump to the other session, so I'm very sorry to miss the rest of this, but I wanted to note something which sort of I kind of captured why we put this workshop together and the thought we had, which is what I found really interesting in listening to each of these speakers so far and some of the issues that they're talking about is that each of them seem to have some surprising facts. Like, you know, this is actually the energy comes from here, or actually the impact is in this place. And that's the fact that we're still getting those surprises, the fact that we don't fully yet understand the impact that all of these technologies have is where I think something like a multi-stakeholder governance venue, governance forum can bring together people and start to sort of dig into those unknowns, to sort of say, okay, actually we've done some research and here's where the impact is, and maybe others will say, okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's not what I had thought initially, but then how do we work with that? So it's really, I think, moving that discussion forward, hopefully in productive ways, about how you actually mitigate the impact that a lot of these technologies have. So yeah, I'm very glad, but also very sorry I have to.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, for also giving us a little bit the frame of why we're organizing this, and maybe a request to you, because you're dashing out. But the key thing there is also, I think, even though this is not the first time that ecology and environment has been discussed in an internet governance forum or in EuroDIG, but I think it is important that this topic remains on the agenda. And also for the IGF in Kyoto, I'm quite clear. I have Vadim Pak on line, who is asking a question. So Vadim, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Patrick. So my name is Vadim Pak. I was one of the focal points for the session. And just bouncing off of what Chris mentioned, one of the things that really puzzled us, and we really wanted to have the view of the participants on this, human decision-making as it stands now, in respect of all of these things which create environmental impacts, is what it is. The decisions are taken. We do not necessarily know when decisions are taken, what would be the environmental cost of these decisions. And my question to the panelists would be, in your view, can we organize decision-making on these questions better? So are decisions taken at the right level hierarchically? Do people who take these decisions have access to the right kind of information? Or maybe perhaps the whole game should be rearranged? That would be my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vadim. That's $1 million question, I would say. Who of the panelists, because Vadim didn't indicate anyone in particular, who of the panelists would like to respond? Can I ask Celine to start, to kickstart this?
Sure, yes, thank you, Vadim, and thanks, Patrick. I think that gets at the heart of international policymaking as well, which is even more complicated because you have, the regional governments, the national governments, the international level, and much of the work that we do at the OECD is to try to build those bridges when it comes to decision making. And so, what we in the policy space love to call a complicated word called interoperability. So it's the basic concept that your rules and your laws, your regulations work together in the same direction. If you have decisions that have been taken in different jurisdictions, and this applies to many policy areas that are not interoperable, that work against each other, it could incentivize actors to engage in regulatory arbitrage, in forum shopping, to find loopholes, to ultimately, evade reporting. In the context of AI, we've heard some ways of reporting, to hide emissions in the cloud, for instance. Regulation needs to be made in a way that's interoperable at a global scale, and also to have basic definitions to ensure that we're talking about the same thing. And it sounds like a simple point, but it's actually quite complicated. And one concrete example that I'll end on is, the definition of what an AI system is. At the EU level, around the world, we've really been discussing this for some time. Of course, at the OECD with the OECD AI principles in 2019, we have a working definition of what an AI system is. Of course, generative AI and new applications will, shed light on perhaps how that definition needs to be flexible and adapted to the times to be time-proof. But so I guess the main takeaway there is ensure that regulations and decisions, lead to something that is interoperable, that is rowing in the same direction, and just at its base ask, are we talking about the same concepts when we discuss these policy topics?
Thank you so much. I think in the meantime, also Vesna has been putting quite a number of documents in the chat. So if you're also connected at the same time, please do have a look at the different documents that have been posted there on the indirect and direct impacts of digital internet technologies and how to mitigate them. So I think that's a crucial issue. Now, from your input, Celine, I have there's a question that pops to mind, and I would also like the audience afterwards to react to it. Are you saying that there is a need to regulate the environmental impact, especially regarding energy consumption, but also considering other drivers of internet-connected technologies? I'm not going to give back the floor to you. I would like to have maybe Johannes, first of all, say something more about it, or my colleagues here in the room. Johannes, do you feel ready for that response, or shall I?
Sure. So the very short answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
The real question that we're kind of grappling with is how and what to regulate, because
Johannes, these are probably going to be the next question, so don't anticipate. we will keep it with a short yes for the time being then, and maybe I will ask my colleagues here in the room also to respond to that. Maybe Eero, would you, with your background on the EU Energy Efficiency Directive, is that a response that is appropriate?
I think that it's a step to right direction. So on the EU level, it has been seen that the energy consumption of data centers is growing and growing. And since EU is trying to reduce the overall energy consumption, they have to address this some way. And the steps that have been laid out in the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive is that first, the data centers will be obliged to report certain key performance indicators, mainly the energy usage and also, let's say, water usage, their, let's say, ICT capacities and the utilization level of those. And first, this information is gathered May next year is the first reporting round, and then the EU Commission shall analyze that data. And the next year they will propose, let's say, their report to the EU Parliament and to Council, and also give a proposal for further measures. So I think that we are taking steps in that direction, that there will be more regulation coming to this area.
Thank you. I have a couple of people wanting to intervene right now. And a follow-up question will definitely be, to which extent will we then come to this more comprehensive picture of the impact that will need to be seen, and that's a story to be continued, I believe, because as Chris was saying, for the time being, we're still discovering new areas, and I think it's important. Vesna, you represent, and I will afterwards give the floor to another Chris Appleyard. So get ready, Chris, in order to prepare your question. But Vesna, you said you represent a technical community. What does that regulation would mean for you? And is that needed? Not only regarding the energy consumption, I would say, which is of course extremely important for the network that you represent, but also I see these rare materials being used at all times for our digital technology. So maybe, Vesna, can you maybe say something more about that question of regulation?
Yes, so through this answer, I also want to address the two things that were mentioned by previous speakers from Celine and the Finnish gentleman in the room, which is and then your question, Patrick. So although I personally believe that the regulation is needed, so that I agree with the short answer, yes, the technical community and the network operators have been traditionally very strongly for the industry self-regulation, and also traditionally the internet has been kind of very hard to regulate. And so I think that's going to be the case, or it has been the case also with regards to to the regulations of energy consumption, water consumption, and specifically because what Celine said that resonated and made me laugh, like then we have to agree on what is definition of the internet. And then everybody kind of starts pointing fingers to the other part, like, no, it's the manufacturing. No, it's the provisioning. And it's not us, we don't have to do anything, but now stepping out from this kind of representation and becoming like more prescriptive of what I believe has to be done is the general decrease in everything, because this is what we on the highest level there was an agreement with the Paris Agreement that the emissions have to decrease by a certain number of percent. It used to be 7.6, but we haven't been doing it, so now it's, let's say, 10% per year, everybody. So if the network engineers and the network operators believe in the self-regulation, then they should start decreasing all of their usages, emissions, energy, water, equipment that they're buying by 10% per year, and then start reporting that so that then the regulation cycle can actually check, has that been going on or not? But looking into the measurements that have been done already, that has not been the case. So the most the network operators can report is that their energy usage has not been increasing, but that's per specific operator. In general, the whole sector has been increasing every year, and that is unacceptable according to the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, Vesna. Obviously, we always put the responsibility elsewhere, as you said, and I think it's also when reaching those 7.5 or 10%, and next year 12.5%, it's always the others that need to do it. Chris Appleyard from Nominet, the floor is yours. Do you agree with this analysis?
Hi there. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Thank you. So I like that we're focusing our time and efforts on reducing energy usage and improving efficiency, but shouldn't we also focus our time on thinking about what to do with electronic waste, to maybe ensure that we send our electronic waste back to the manufacturers so that we can create a more circular economy?
Thank you. Excellent question. I think it's definitely part of the paradigm. So can we maybe, Stephen, from your background as industrial ecologist, can you maybe say something more about this proposal and also about the regulation issue? I haven't given you the floor on that.
Okay, thank you. So basically, if we are talking about regulation, I will use my perspective as like the general government, since internet use physical infrastructure, and since it delivers also physical impact on the environment and also energy impact, so it should be regulated as with the same manner as other aspect of, like, for example, like food industry also be regulated. But the question is, like, who will become the actor? Because, like, we know that internet is a network of networks, and the agency in here and the ownership of the one product or one service will be vague. So we need in LCA the goal and scope definition step to make it more regulatable. And regarding the circular economy and the critical raw materials, I completely agree that we know that European Union has proposed the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, that one of the key points that we need to increase the recycling of the rare materials, because we know that mining has those kind of environmental impacts, and we haven't talked about the another proposal to go to deep sea mining that also still in infancy, although some companies have want to start it this July, although the environmental impact has not been released, like how bad will it impact. So the priority is to reduce the primary consumption of the raw materials, and it's through the recycling of those e-waste. I agree.
Thank you very much. Of course, we also continue to say that reality is often the opposite. But are there any reactions here from the room? Yes, please. Yes. Present yourself and speak out loud to youth. EuroDIG, no doubt.
Hi everybody, I'm Sarah. I'm part of the EuroDIG. And first of all, thank you so much for doing this session. I think it is highly essential for the time being to speak about sustainability and technology. But I would like just to stress 2 points that we didn't speak about, and I think they are related to the topic. From the user point of view, I think that what it has also to be addressed is the greenwashing we are all constantly victim of. Because even if we want to be sustainable, we first think that we know how, but it's not true. So this is something that I would like to highlight. And the second point is something that I already spoken about, but I would like to stress it more, is regarding that if we speak about mining, if we speak about the production process of technology, we should really stress also the human rights violations that are taking place in order to do that. So I would really like a world where environment, sustainability, and protection of human rights go hand in hand. So that's it.
Thank you so much for these very important points that indirectly come from the EuroDIG. I think it's extremely important, and our rapporteur here, Francesco, is eagerly typing the greenwashing and the human rights violations down. I think, Francesco, if I may use my capacity as moderator, I would even add child exploitation to that, which is very closely linked also to the human rights violations that we see. But are there any other questions from the room first? I see that you're eagerly waiting, so please go ahead. Yeah, I mentioned, yeah.
Yes.
Also from EuroDIG.
Well, since last year.
No longer, okay, okay. You passed the barrier.
Miguel Telecom, and actually, well, I remember a couple of years ago, from an application point of view, it was streaming, which was set to drive data consumption and thus energy consumption in IT. And it seems that now the attention has shifted somewhat towards AI. I find this very interesting that it was mentioned before how much energy consumption, how much
the training
associated with the training and the AI model, and obviously the use of ChatGPT and other systems consuming a lot of energy. So my question would be, how do the experts, what do you think, how does AI energy consumption relate to energy consumption stemming from streaming, and how do you think it's going to evolve in the future? Possibly AI, the future driver of energy consumption.
Thank you. I hope that our colleagues online have understood the issue. It's basically comparing between different forms of the use of digital technology. What is most energy consuming? It's almost like a ranking. Celine, has the OECD, or Johannes, has the OECD done some work on that?
Sure, maybe I'll start and I'll pass it to Johannes. So I think just to make one comment around the training of ChatGPT, that was just mentioned. As Chris said before, you know, we have a bunch of surprises, right? Things that are counterintuitive. And so I'd like to just highlight two of those quickly as well. And so one that we talked about was actually the embodied emissions of hardware is something that's not reported. And so that's, you know, one potential surprise. The second one is what we're actually hearing from experts, and it would be great to get some, you know, concrete evidence over in time-based series data on this. And that's what we're working to do, is we're actually hearing from experts that, as I mentioned before, the training, although huge, is not the most compute intensive and energy intensive part of the AI system. It's actually the inference. When you're talking about a big system used over time, experts think that it's actually the inferencing of the model, the use of the model, that is more compute intensive. So I just wanted to highlight that because it's counterintuitive and everyone just talks about the training all the time, but we might not actually be, you know, highlighting the most compute intensive portion over the lifetime of the model. And then I think the question related to, or how are we comparing, how does AI compare to ICT measures overall, if I kind of understood?
Yes, and specifically, we specifically mentioned streaming in this context. So that basically not the people in the room here are in charge, but the ones that are actually following online, even though they saved some CO2 emissions by not coming here. But it's actually the streaming that would be problematic. Do you agree, Celine?
It's interesting, and the IEA, the International Energy Agency, has done some analysis comparing internet traffic to data center energy use. And while internet traffic has gone up quite significantly, the actual hardware, the data center energy use, has remained flat. And that's really interesting because that seems to point to efficiency gains of the hardware over time, even though the demand is increasing. We would love to have comparable numbers, you know, add another line on that graph when it comes to AI. Unfortunately, we're kind of early in the data collection space when it comes to AI, and we're working to standardize these measures. So they're hard to get. Some measures from Google say that they use about 15% of their data centers, data center energy use for AI. That's just one company reported by them. So, you know, we'd love to get more data and make that comparable. Maybe Johannes has more to add, but maybe Patrick, you want to respond as well?
No, if Johannes would like to say something more about it, please do. And then we have a very interesting comment online, which I will read out afterwards. Johannes?
Yeah, so the problem, as Celine said, is really, it is very hard to put numbers behind some of these issues. So what's sure is that AI is only a fraction of overall ICT energy use, of overall ICT carbon emissions. But it's really hard to disentangle the AI from overall data center use, from overall ICT use. That's what we've been trying to do for the past year or so, but it tends to be hard. But of course, as AI proliferates, I think that's true for the entire ICT industry. To the point that Vesna made before, what's sure is that AI use will be increasing and ICT use overall will be increasing. And since we have enormous opportunities to use it for decentralized energy grids and for carbon-free transport, it is really vital, and that's to the very short answer of yes, we need regulation. It's vital that the infrastructure that's being used for these applications is as environmentally friendly as possible. So we can kind of absorb and not increase, but rather decrease, hopefully, the 7–10% that we need of the infrastructure as we use the applications for the overall sustainability goals that we have.
Thank you, Johannes. Before I give the floor to Vesna, I think I'll read Juho Reva's question and answer at the same time. Is the idea of a sustainability by design in use in some manner anywhere, as analog to security by design and privacy by design are right now already well known, but they are still not fully utilized and required? The main reason cloud services have security incidents is that the configurations are not readily secure and private. By extension, configurations are not by default most energy efficient. Can this be required in norms? Does this have a potential as a solution, or is this a misunderstanding of the technologies themselves? Vesna, you wanted to respond to this. And I would ask my colleagues, panelists in the room also to react if just indicate, because now with these electronic systems, people can indicate that they want to speak, but we also have hands. Vesna, you're...
Yes, and I find myself kind of lagging behind all the topics that are being discussed, because there was a question from the room about the rankings, like could we
That's
have
right.
the ranking? And for me, coming from like the communication side, I would say that maybe there are numbers about that, but for me, it's kind of also even intuitive. Like if we are trying to communicate with the Internet of Humans, when we want to talk to each other, I would say that the ranking on what requires the most resources goes from the VR, like the virtual reality, to the video call, to the audio call, to the text messages like chatting, and then to the intermittent text messages like emails, or even less demanding text, which is not going there like between users real time. And this is for me, let's say, the recommendation for the future, but for, let's say, dystopian future, where all of these other more demanding ways of communication will not be available, and they are already not available to a lot of people in the different parts of the world. So there is a huge inequality already with what kind of speed and bandwidth and resources available to different people. And so I think if we want to decrease the environmental impact, we could, as individuals and as consumers, decrease this following this ranking to some kind of level that we are comfortable with. But this is a very minor impact that we have as individuals. So again, we can go back to the regulation or in other methods that we still have to talk about, like and then coming back to you, like if this would be sustainable technology by design, how would we make sure that these norms are actually followed and implemented? And that requires the changes in the culture, let's say, and of course in economic and political systems, because it's part of this cycle of demand and supply and people wanting to have everything faster, and then the providers actually making sure that that is available without thinking of what the actual impact is. So it's a conundrum, and yeah, it's a difficult question.
Thank you. I think it's also with the extrapolation and explosion of ICT instruments. Maybe an advice to the EuroDIGers, that is that maybe they should start with a ranking of the worst ecological imprint of ICT tools, and this because in many of the big internet companies, the zero ecological imprint has already been put forward as one of the positive arguments for the buying of their products. So maybe that's an idea for the future. I also already asked the question, are the current regulations, the proposals, the regulatory discussions, are they informed by a good understanding of those technologies themselves, their markets, their interconnectivity, their interconnections involved, as well as their direct and indirect impacts on the environment? So are these regulations already appropriate? Celine, sorry to turn back to you, because you're in Paris.
Oui, c'est ça. No, thanks, Patrick. I think that's a good question. And indeed, you know, one of the very difficult things around, you know, is AI, how do we regulate AI and environmental impacts is, you know, a lot of these large language models and foundation models, they're black boxes in a sense. Even the brightest minds in AI can't quite understand how they work. And it's really hard to regulate something and to create rules for something that you don't completely understand. So, you know, their applications to society and economies are also very new. When you think of generative AI and how it's diffusing greatly through the economy. So there's a lot of unknowns, but this is why I think regulators need to take a consultative approach, need to take an iterative approach. And while we've seen a lot of activity when it comes to AI in the AI safety and ethics space, the sustainability dimensions have kind of lagged behind. But until recently, I would say, and so we were very, it was great to see that there's actually some language now in the most recent version of the EU AI Act that is, again, making its way through the appropriate kind of validation processes, but there's language around life cycle impacts when it comes to AI. The mitigation of environmental impacts, the reporting of environmental impacts when it comes to high-risk systems. So this is very interesting, and so it remains to be seen how Europe will, you know, eventually implement these regulations. But we were, it was a positive signal that that at least is included there. And I'm sure, Patrick, you know, in the work that you're doing at the Council of Europe, also looking at both people and planet. I know UNESCO has done some work in their recommendation on AI ethics, and of course the OECD AI principles. So at the international level, there's certainly, you know, we try to capture it. So that is an interesting development.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you so much, Celine. And since I'm also together with Vadim representing the Council of Europe here, it's true that with the Reykjavik summit, the link between digital development and especially the development of artificial intelligence and the ecological impact have been made. And that's certainly something that we will be looking into in the future as well. That's why we co-organized this very specific session, but also proposing to continue this work in the meantime, but also leading up to the IGF. And we hope to be able to, together with our Japanese partners there as well, to look more directly into the ecological questions related to this. Are there any questions from the room here? Yes, please. Speak out loud because the capture here is not so good.
My name is Komei. I'm a PhD candidate in IT engineering, maybe some of the technical side of the. I do ask a question about the reading of the regulations. Actually, I didn't convince that the regulation of AI, for example, energy consumption is needed because. I think that maybe regulation is very needed where there is failure in the market. And I myself am using AI to decrease the complexity of a video, which comprises about 80% of the internet traffic. So when everything, for example, is outside of the reducing the complexity, I don't know why we should regulate the energy consumption. And also, I think that just counting the percent of the usage of energy for AI is maybe a little serious because this is done to reduce the energy in something else. For example, we have a video conference and there is a lot of reducing energy of using the trade laws to come here. And maybe this is, for example, for the better to maybe trust the market and trust the technical to do the stuff to make the better life.
Thank you. Thank you for your opinion on that no regulation on AI would really be needed in the current times. May I ask my colleague Vadim maybe to give the perspective of the Council of Europe? I'm sorry to draw you into the panel like this, Vadim, but I think this is your area of work, so please.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for giving to me the floor. The Council of Europe works on certain aspects of, sustainability, protection of environment. But since our focus is human rights, we are looking at human rights effect of environmental changes more than anything else. So if we speak about the current work in the Committee on Artificial Intelligence, the angle that we're taking is human rights angle. We are also developing a human...
Vadim, if I just may interrupt, the angle you're taking is also on regulating AI. And I think the question was...
Oh, yes, definitely.
Primarily
yes, most definitely. Yeah, as regards regulation on AI, this is a very complex question because of the diffuse nature of artificial intelligence technologies and the way they permeate societies. It is very likely that the approach that national regulators will take will be extremely context specific. And whilst it's clear that, regulators may choose to regulate technology as such, this is something that is up to regulators to decide. Some countries may also go for, a much more cautious approach, which is why the work that we do in the Committee on Artificial Intelligence would have to be able to accommodate various possible regulatory approaches when it comes to AI. That essentially means that countries that would like to go after technology as such would be able to join the convention that we're working on. And then countries that would like to, have more limited or context-specific measures would be able to join this instrument as well. This is the answer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Vadim. So that the opinion in the audience is also confronted with what is happening in the international organizations right now. I will give the floor to each of the panelists for a 1-minute closing remark, because we're unfortunately already coming to the end of our session here. And if you could, in doing so, maybe also, what are the solutions that we could steer towards for a more effective approach of containing, let's say, the ecological footprint with the development of the digital tools. Celine, you're always my spearhead, so I'm asking you again to kick off there.
Sure,
and the others, please be prepared.
That's great. I'm going to answer that question with a bit of my wish list as well, and also a very typically OECD response. So I think we can, as they say, we can only change what we measure, right? And so this would just be, again, a call for improved measurement, improved standards, collaboration on data collection, and really that data collection accompanies the regulation, but we also build capacity so that people are able to collect data and that it's usable. And in terms of solutions, I think one thing that we've been reflecting on, and I'll just leave the group with, is this concept that's emerged for several years called AI model cards. So again, this is the idea that perhaps AI models need to come with some sort of nutritional label on them, or information that is, reports number of parameters, data used, but also how much water how much energy, what were the carbon emissions, so that those, using fine-tuning these models can understand what they're working with. And that would also make our life a lot more easier from an analysis perspective to have something standardized. So maybe it's model cards, system cards, they've been called various other things. Maybe it's something else, but I just put that out there as food for thought. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Celine. Thank you for participating. Johannes?
Yeah, so to kind of add to that wish list is what we've been talking quite a lot today, to look at the entire life cycle impact, and going back to the direct indirect framework, to also consider the indirect impacts, meaning the application of digital technologies, to both leverage them for the key sectors where they can have the most impact, and to not use them where they might have adverse impact on the climate. I think one of the comments was on digital waste. Actually, electronic waste is the fastest growing waste stream of them all, and only a fraction of them is recycled. We heard about the critical minerals you need in the beginning to put into the infrastructure. So really having the life cycle approach, because energy and carbon get kind of all the attention in policy circles, in a lot of reports. So to widen the angle a bit and to look at more comprehensively at life cycle impacts would be very valuable.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Johannes. Here, Stephen, what is your wish list?
Okay, so I think from this dialogue, both from panelists and from audience, we all agree that AI is like intertwined and then also something in the future. So my wish list is we can come back to the basic of what is the main thing that the ICT need to see in the environment. Is not the AI that is in the future, but it's in the current situation. What is the biggest environmental impact that ICT give? And it's mainly physical thing. And if we also talk about energy contribution, it's not the root problem. The root problem is where the energy comes. So we need to solve these basic things and give this advanced thing to PhD students, to researchers in advanced stage, etc. So after we solve these basic things in ICT, we can focus on the later development. That's my stage.
Thank you. Thank you. That would, of course, lead us to another 1 hour discussion. But since we're being called by the organizers, Eero, what's on your wish list?
Well, like the previous speakers has mentioned, we need to measure more clearly what is the impact of the ICT to the environment, and also forming a holistic picture of that. So
a holistic measurement, that is what
yes,
are Eero's wet dreams.
And make that transparent to the users also.
Thank you. And with the ecological barometer that I suggested on each of our devices. I still have Vesna. No, I have not forgotten you, Vesna. Last but not least, Vesna, your wish list.
My wish list: solidarity, degrowth, and urgency.
In that order?
Yes.
Okay, we heard some wish lists here as well. The greenwashing issues, the human rights violations, the use of models and which are so intensive, computer intensive, the proliferation of ICT, the explosion of ICT, maybe the ranking of the worst ICT tool with the worst ecological impact. All of that are issues that we discussed. But I will give the floor to Francesco to give us a 2-minute roundup before we're kicked out of the room and the red light starts buzzing.
Rounds is almost impossible. Okay,
Francesco.
Everything. Yes, I'm sorry, Vittorio. Well, actually, we started focusing on the nexus between digital transition and environmental impact, which is really important, and sometimes even controversial, especially when it comes to, I don't know, quantum computers, also AI with direct and indirect impacts. But actually, this is really important to focus on because environment and human rights are deeply connected. So it also connects this to digital transition as well as child abuse and exploitation, as the moderator asked me to add. Of course, human rights cannot take place in an unhealthy biosphere, so they are therefore double linked to data gatherings and online communications. I've already mentioned direct and indirect environmental effects. I wouldn't just focus that much on those because they've been much better explained by other people during the panel. But of course, the problem is that to analyze these outcomes, it's really important to define also a standard measure, which is also in all the wish lists of the final points. Furthermore, many people think that AI is software and ephemeral, but it is actually rooted in concrete infrastructures that are problematic when it comes to the environmental side, environmental problems. And LLM's impacts actually are related also to inference and the other processes that actually take place in the concrete and the hardware level. Of course, there are indirect effects of the application of AI. These are, for example, the negative outcomes if AI is applied to sectors that work against the fight for against climate change and anything else. But what is also important is that I've already mentioned quantum internet, but it is also important to think about cloud services. Because they are basically huge factories of data centers filled with computers and storage devices. And here we come again to the hardware problem and the hardware related issues, environmental issues. And of course, but the fact that great companies like Meta, Microsoft, Google, well, have their biggest environmental contribution, like 90%, am I right? Okay, in that comes from the supply chain. So not just for the direct emissions. And this process is not transparent, and it must be more transparent than it is right now. Of course, we also spoke about rankings, especially when it comes to communication, which was the example given by Tesna. And we saw that when we focus on rankings, we see that there are huge inequalities. And so this also works against human rights, equality, and generally speaking. I've almost finished, sorry. I promise. Of course, during the discussion, we highlighted the importance of focusing on reflecting on the decision-making process, both from the measurement point of view. So the need to try is important measure or more transparent measures and so on and so forth. And also maybe the reflection of if sustainable technology by design is actually possible, it is actually beneficial. But we also try to reflect on the if regulations can be performed, and we have actually had a debate on this, especially when it comes to AI, and also what kind of approach regulators should take. And we basically said that they should either use consultative and iterative approach, but please correct me if I'm wrong. And finally, of course, there are, well, you made your personal wish list, okay, when it comes to several solutions, and you basically agreed on the need to find the common standards and have a greater collaboration, data collection, improve measurement, and also focusing on where the energy comes from and not just about the process.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Francesco. Thank you. This was a hard job. Thank you so much. With 15 minutes delay, which is not my usual thing to do, but we'll conclude this session. Thank you for the very good online participation as well, the discussions that were held there. Please check what you missed. Also, Minda Moreira, who supported a number of the panelists in their interactions. So very much welcome. Thank you for the numerous participation here in the room and active participation from the EuroDIG and the other DIG, the EuroDIG. Thank you so much and have a great evening. Thank you so much.